For those of you that have actually read the program, you'll notice that I am not Becky. And there's a very good reason for that. If Becky were up here, she is so glamorous, no one would be able to concentrate on all the cool stuff that's going to be said. So she decided to abdicate and put me in charge instead. So, wonderful to have everybody here. We've got our drinks ready for shortly after this, where we'll go into celebrating advanced therapies in all their sizes, shapes, and forms. So, to all of you, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Sven. I am a VC by day. I sit on a number of boards and do other things by night. And in the times in between, I'm one of the founders of the Advanced Therapies think tank. So I'm going to introduce my guests in just a moment, but I'm going to try and kind of set the scene. And please excuse me for doing a lot of reading, because Becky did all the hard work. I'm just here to try and make her look good. So in cell and gene therapies, we really spend a lot of time talking about science. We talk about breakthrough data, technologies, vectors. We even occasionally talk about patients, which is very cool. But we hardly ever talk about where these things get manufactured, where the science gets done, where the products get manufactured, what they do just before they leave to go to those all-important patients. And so it's really important to think about developers and how they use capital in terms of creating, renting, or moving into different facilities. And how easily is it to transition from discovery into clinical and then commercial stage. For most founders, infrastructure is often more about finding somewhere affordable, somewhere available, and somewhere that's actually just good enough in order to be able to get things going. But as we all know, when things are going well and the science matures, the company matures, and by necessity the product matures towards scalability and hopefully commercial success, those early choices really may start to matter much more than you might expect on day one. So in cell and gene specifically, the science is increasingly sound. One of the real bottlenecks now is around commercialization, cost standardization, and speed to market. So the question becomes, how do the buildings, the facilities, and the ecosystems that house all this incredible science enable the journey rather than slow it down? Today we're going to explore that infrastructure, not as real estate, but more as a strategic asset across the entire life cycle of products. From early stage incubator space to clinical manufacturing platforms, from build versus buy decisions to how we design ecosystems that help attract and retain product and, most importantly, talent. So, to help us unpack this, I have two amazing guests. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves right now. First is Lucy Foley from Exmoor Pharma. Lucy, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you Sven. As Sven says, I'm the CEO at Exmoor Pharma, and we are a company that has been working in cell and gene therapies for over 20 years. Firstly as consultants, helping people decide on whether to build or buy capability and helping them indeed design that capability, to now providing that capability ourselves through our CDMO services. And we're based in the UK in Bristol.
Brilliant. That's wonderful, Lucy. Thank you so much. Right, then we go over to BJ van Aken.
See, I'm at a significant disadvantage because I don't have a British accent that sounds extremely intelligent. I've got an American accent, so stick with me here. BJ van Aken, I'm with Phase 3 Real Estate Partners. We are a local to San Diego life science development real estate company. We have roughly 4.5 million square feet, and my role as Executive Vice President of the West is to oversee San Diego and San Francisco. And so our three markets are San Diego, San Francisco, and Boston. And the entirety of the 4.5 million square foot portfolio is biotech real estate. And I think we are on the earlier side of the engaging with the R&D side of the industry with our real estate. And so we've been in in the business under this platform for about 11 years now, and have developed from our first building in San Diego, like I said, about 4.5 million square feet. And so we've weathered storms certainly over the last 11 years, and we're currently in the eye of another one here. So nice to be with you today, and hope to provide some value.
Indeed, fantastic. Thank you so much. So as you can see, we've got two amazing guests. So what I would ask all of you is think about some questions, because you never know when we're going to ask you the questions. So beat us to it and ask us cool and exciting questions. Right, so let's get started. So when a spin-out first raises seed funding, infrastructure is typically not one of the main strategic decisions that they make. They try and solve as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And it's about finding a place, finding a home, getting stuff done. So to BJ, what do you actually see founders prioritizing at the moment when they're looking for space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that changes depending on the market, depending on the macro environment. During the COVID days, when capital was easy to raise and company formation was high, I think there was a significant focus on the highest and best quality, what can attract employees, what can keep employees, and also what can kind of protect my growth as a company that's facing over the next handful of years a series of binary outcomes that might mean we advance very quickly. And oftentimes back in COVID, that meant going from 2 people to 50 people in the first year. I would say today, certainly not in a capital-rich environment. There's a big emphasis on costs. I think that's the focus really. I think for most of these companies has shifted a little bit from how can I attract the right employees and talent to how can I attract the right venture capital with my investment. And so focusing on the balance sheet, preservation of the balance sheet, making sure that the real estate's not something that becomes a hindrance for a future capital raise and or a future change in need. I think right now economics are incredibly important, and I mean, it's a very soft market, and so you can achieve some of those economics still at great projects that can attract talent. But I think right now it's really all about economics, and has been for the last 3 years. And frankly, there's not been many companies making real estate decisions over the last 3 years. I think it's been a frozen market, but that's starting to thaw out now, and we're seeing a lot more activity in some of the early stage companies, even the first part of this year. So,
really, really interesting. And I'm going to put you on the spot just a teeny bit more. You mentioned venture capitalists. Are you noticing a difference in VC attitudes based on the types of office space or lab space that a company has? So in other words, my experience was in the good old, bad old days of COVID, when the money was flowing, people were getting these big old labs. It was all new and shiny, and they all got company coats and backpacks and you name it. But now that kind of thing is seen as a little bit dirty and a little bit not a good use of money.
Yeah, certainly fair. I think, yes. Short answer is yes. The optics of a real estate decision are important. I think in today's market, it'd be hard to go and sign a real estate deal that had bad economics, even if it had great optics, right? Like you can get in a beautiful space that's brand new and still say, hey, look what I did with my balance sheet, VC. And there's a little bit less sensitivity to that. I think on the venture side, the interesting thing is it's a very small industry, and many board members sit on many boards, and one real estate deal versus another real estate deal gets discussed at the board level, and we have significantly more engagement around really the board's opinions based on what they are seeing elsewhere in the market and how really strategically granular these companies are being about real estate decisions today, and not protecting the future growth, thinking about how do we protect the future funding round.
Interesting, interesting. So really worthwhile thinking about from a founder perspective. So Lucy, coming to you, thinking more, and you often deal with companies slightly later on, and so you almost end up with the end result of potentially bad decisions made in companies' youth. How do you look at that? What are you seeing? What are your approaches to it?
So, yeah, I mean, as ever, the earlier we can engage with the client, the better, and the earlier we can help them build that sort of growth plan, which involves their infrastructure, the better. And that's not to say that the answer is always come to Exmoor. Exmoor will do everything for you. That is to say what's appropriate for now and that doesn't hinder your future. And I think what we're seeing more of now, as money is tight and as runways have to last longer, is people almost incubating things for too long in their company and going from R into D because they don't really have a financial choice. And so then the knock-on effect of that is the amount of change that you have to do in manufacture later down the line.
And so the cost of that is financial and time?
Yeah, I mean, it is going to have an impact. The size of the impact can vary, but it will make things more complicated. And at that point, you want to move fast, and you don't want to have unnecessary hurdles.
Okay, very cool. Right, audience question time. How many of you out here are founders and have had to go out and scramble for accommodations for your company? Yeah, you guys have. Any thoughts? What were your experiences? I think there's a microphone up here. If you guys, if Srinivasan, if you want to come and share your experience.
Hi, my name is Srinivas. I'm a co-founder of Sankal Bio. It's an NK cell therapy company. So we are at the very beginning of our journey. So what was important for us was to be very lean. We are bootstrapping. So we looked for spaces that were in incubators, tried to apply for something like J Labs, for example. But because of their strategic priorities, they may or may not have a room for you. So we went with, we looked for multiple spaces, and even within that, we had to look for options that were financially viable for us personally. So happy to report that we are at UC San Diego Home Lab, and financially they worked out great for us, even though we...
Sorry, can you say that one more time? You leased where?
Sorry?
Where did you say you leased space?
At Home Lab.
Oh, Home Lab, okay.
Yeah, Home Lab at UC San Diego.
Brilliant.
Ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Julio.
It's great to hear some good news. Really, really exciting. Anyone else have any experiences? We take bad ones too. Well, I worry I'm one of the few people that's had a bad experience. Anyway, moving on. A lot of psychiatric counseling later. Right, let's think about it. So we've recently seen a number of early stage facilities being opened. And, you know, amongst these around the world, Victoria House in London, Biopol in Switzerland, and even last week, F Labs in Fukuoka in Japan. There are other places in the Netherlands and then all around the US. And then also thinking about places like J Labs, places like Lilly, facilities, things like that. So there are quite a few of these going around. And personally, I find this really positive because there are now spaces for companies and they all are slightly different. So to both of you, do we have the right mix of low cost, emphasis on low cost, incubator space and infrastructure outside of universities? And do we have support to encourage real entrepreneurial momentum at the moment? Lucy, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure, I can. You know, Exmoor grew in an incubator space before we went in to build our own facility. Where I think the problem is today is exactly as you said, Sven. Because the cost of these incubator spaces is quite high, we're seeing people stay in universities a bit longer. And in universities, you have access to a lot of services and equipment, and it becomes a real comfortable to stay there. So I feel like in the UK, what we need is more low-cost labs where there is a central infrastructure that people can access, and so that the university space is freed up for more innovation to come through the university and is not held on to by these early-stage spin-outs.
Okay, really interesting, and I can echo that. BJ, what are your thoughts?
So our portfolio is mostly filled by graduated companies out of incubators, and north of 100, right? That's we tend to work with companies that are kind of Series A and or large seed round companies, but the incubator world is interesting because low cost might exist if you happen to be a strategic for a pharma that's running their own incubator. But if you go to a shared equipment open lab incubator, there are a lot of perks, right? You can control your capital, right? There's shared equipment. There is flexibility on the terms, right? So you're not hammered with a big liability on your balance sheet that's signing up for a long term. You pay for the flexibility, but it's not cheap. And so we're constantly talking to companies that are in incubators that are weighing the benefit of flexibility and an equipped lab against the cost savings of a direct space of their own that might require a little bit more of a commitment. So we've built our platform to try to really alleviate the qualification process, I would say, to go and get your own lab space. We've built our entire portfolio speculatively before a company is formed, before a company comes to us and says, we need X amount of benches or tissue culture rooms or whatever. So we build the space and then try to provide enough flexibility for the companies coming out of incubator space that if they can bring equipment and furnish the labs, we're agnostic almost as it relates to length of term, and even can be pretty aggressive on pricing because the investment into this specific real estate transaction has already been done. We've already put the money in, and we've done it in a way that we believe is durable because at that stage, the physical lab environment itself, one company to another, 80% of that doesn't change. And so if you can do it well, you can put enough infrastructure on the front end and provide a little bit of flexibility for the 20% from company A to company B, then you can actually start to provide some lower cost, quick occupancy, flexible lease term solutions for companies that are otherwise, maybe stuck with either an incubator or go sign up for a 7-year lease and convince a landlord or come out of pocket millions of dollars to build your own space.
Right. Lucy, coming back to you, you mentioned some challenges with companies tending to stay in academia rather longer than perhaps they should. What are the things you've seen as a result of that, and what advice would you give to a company that's starting out now?
I think that the challenges of staying in academia are that, it's simple, isn't it, really? There's an infrastructure around you, behind you, that supports you, things from health and safety, and all of the general infrastructure, lab gases, quality systems, that sort of thing, that you don't appreciate that you need as a business. And so you're not actually, in my view, running a complete business, and so the learning curve that you have to go on when you do exit is quite a bit steeper than you probably thought it would be. Some of the equipment that you access maybe is something is cost prohibitive when you do spin out and go into your own space. And it's that sort of the reality that running a business is it in its entirety, and actually sitting in that space, I think, protects people sometimes a little bit too long from the reality of what the real world is like.
Okay, really, really interesting. Thank you. So let's move on a little bit. So in cell and gene therapy, we've often seen companies build their own facilities. And for those of you old enough to have been around in the old days, we used to have almost entire conferences talking about build versus buy, and it used to get quite entertaining and sometimes almost physical, and Tony will remember some of those days. And simply they did this because there were no alternatives and there was no real choice. So as the sector's matured, should buy now be the default, or are there any better options compared to buy? Lucy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, and there wasn't another option out there at some time. There are options there now, and you would default to buy, don't build. But as the industry evolves, that will sometimes no longer become an option. And I think partner to build is a better option. So partner to work in partnership with somebody so you can buy their services when you need to buy their services and their infrastructure, but you have the flexibility to be able to build in the future or build in partnership with that company. So I guess you have more choice as you go through the commercialization journey.
So is that, for those of you that don't know, I apologize, sort of the reef model? Is that similar to the reef model like Autolus has done, where they had a facility that was essentially built for them, and I think one of the Swiss banks sort of bankrolled it, and then they're going to have to end up paying it off as they go on? Is that sort of what you're thinking about, or is it more of a hoteling option?
I don't think we've fully explored all the options here yet. I think there are various different versions that we could do this in. For me, if I think about Exmoor, we want to do what's right for the company and for the product, and it may be that they do their clinical manufacture with us and they have given us their therapy, but it may be that there is a model in between that where we work together on that facility, building that facility, and then we staff and operate that facility on their behalf. And there are other versions of that, and I think we think it's either or, and it doesn't have to be binary.
Very interesting, yeah, so it's thinking inside the box, which is actually outside the box. BJ, what are your thoughts?
Oh man, this is out of my lane of expertise for sure. But just because we're typically not engaged in the manufacturing space, even on the earlier clinical side. Sometimes we do lease space to companies that build out clean room and manufacturing space to run a CDMO. But I would say Bain Capital is our joint venture capital partner across our entire platform. I know from a investor's perspective, there's been a lot of attention over the last 5 to 7 years around this manufacturing on demand model, where you can actually invest in what may be a somewhat durable manufacturing real estate play that can house one company today and another company tomorrow. And Bain's got a strategic partner to work on that mission. Although, at least here in the States, or at least on the West Coast, I've not seen a huge amount of success yet with that model. I think I've seen many business plans for it, and it makes sense. But I'm not sure on the manufacturing side where the flaws are and where that becomes tricky, and where, does every generic manufacturing module work for every therapeutic or whatever, So it's certainly out of my expertise, but I do think there's a lot of energy being put into how do we make manufacturing more accessible, and at least from a real estate investor's perspective, I know there's a lot of focus on that.
Okay, BJ, so let's stay with you. And this, apologies, this may be, out of your scope, and if so, tell me to take a long walk off a short pier. But what advice would you give to companies that are, have raised the Series A and they moved into one of your facilities, and now they're thinking, do I build, do I buy, do I do something in between? At what stage would you advise them to make that decision?
90% of the companies that are moving, most of our companies are moving through either preclinical or phase 1 clinical studies. I would think that you would need to have a significant amount of progress through phase 2 and beyond in order to consider building something that is bespoke to your specific product. Okay, great. How about you, Lucy? What are you thinking? What are you advising companies? Because obviously you can take a lot of that load for them, but are you happy to move into becoming a commercial manufacturer for company A, B, C, D, and E?
or do you advise them at some stage they need to find another alternative? At what stage, and what triggers that?
So historically, we like to engage really early with customers from spin out, and we can hold. We've been client led, and we've expanded our reach as clients have asked us to, and we're not quite there yet. You know, we've had our manufacturing license for just over a year. Nobody's asked us to go commercial yet, but they are definitely part of the discussions we have. Like, people want to know what our commercial experience is because they want to understand, am I going to have to move again? And the thing that we can reassure them is that if they're successful and they grow and they want us to grow with them, we will absolutely support them in doing that. That's how we've built our business.
Okay, that's really useful, because I know, you know, having been in this spot before, when you're speaking to a CDMO, you don't want to think, right, in 3 years' time, I've got to start the whole process again. I've got to start, you know, more RFPs, more diligence, more tech transfer, more headaches, more grey hairs. You kind of want something to be able to go all the way through, and so that's the ideal. Okay, really, really useful. So let's move on a little bit. So how do we think about designing infrastructure that really evolves with a company? And that goes from bench science all the way through clinical manufacturing without becoming inefficient or obsolete. So how do we really plan for the future? And Lucy, we were talking a little bit, you know, before the start, and before you guys started really manufacturing in anger, you've also got a part of your company is designing facilities, providing guidance. You know, thank you to some of your folks for helping me out in another company before. I know with the innovation hubs, you guys have been very involved, particularly with Sheffield. So you've got really deep consultancy capabilities and experience with designing facilities. How do you discuss this with clients and help them to think through the evolution of their business and being able to plan for that as they go forward?
Yeah, I think as we built our own facility in Bristol, it was very reassuring that we were our worst client in this process. So our demands far outweighed what was possible at times. But it really starts with thinking about where what you're building, where the thing that you want to build, where it starts and where it ends. Does it end at clinical? Does it end in development? Does it go all the way through to commercial? And building back a plan from there and trying to do things in stages that when you have to, so that you can add capacity and capability as you need it. So that URB and design and really setting out your stall in the beginning is really important. I think with technology today, you can be more flexible in how you do that, and you don't need to down tools and stop operations to be able to expand capability. And not everything will go according to plan, so you need to build what's appropriate for now, but have a line of sight to the future, either in one footprint or in multiple footprints.
Okay, so build for now, but plan for tomorrow. BJ, what about your thoughts? How do you approach these discussions with clients? Because some of your clients tend to be a little further on, sort of Series A, as you were saying, so they've graduated out. They've got a bit of an idea of where they're going, but nothing's ever set in stone.
I would say, so on the R&D side, the lab environment, something that we build on the front end that, you know, has enough capacity to be able to be flexible for the durable, you know, life of the building or the space. Usually, we're building a template. And that template is sort of a preset formula that over the last 25 years building space for early stage companies, we've realized like this is what 80% of these companies need. And then we built in some flexibility. The building itself, you know, to ensure that there's plenty of capacity in the building systems, to ensure that there's, you know, the gases that are distributed throughout the lab environment, and that it's done in a flexible way that can be modulated and moved and so on. But we do often run into companies that maybe look at space from shell with us and say, okay, like how do we design this? And our advice is always to plan for the upside, but then also plan for the downside. And there's been too many stories of companies that have said, "Oh, I love this 3-floor building. Let's put our labs on the first floor and offices on the second and third floor." And if things don't go according to plan, it's not really easy to say, well, let's take a third of this space and sublease it or find another company to cohabitate with. And so on the front end, making sure that not just planning for the good days, but planning for some downside scenarios where you can say, okay, if this lab component can live on this floor and the adjacencies aren't as critical, how does that help us in a downside scenario? So, again, most of the space that we're building is not specifically for a manufacturing target as much as it is for keeping the lab space as durable as possible, both for us and or for the company that may need to sublease it in the future and or downsize out of it. And then we've got to go find another company to fill it.
Okay, very cool. So it's about that scenario planning. So Lucy, thinking now about when you advise companies and potentially when you advise other organizations like incubators, not all labs are created equal. How do you think about designing the ideal agnostic lab? What is kind of the thinking that you guys go through when you design something like that?
Different in different scenarios. So if you were taking an autologous cell therapy where the process was well mapped out, the product portfolio was all autologous cell therapy, you'd be designing the space either as a fit out usually within an existing space, and you'd be mapping that process into there. What we tend to do and what we did for ourselves was we looked at 13 different processes and different modalities, and we designed the space with our architects, and then we mapped all of those unit operations and all of the utilities into those unit operations into that space, pulled the processes back out and looked at what it meant for the space in terms of utilities and rationalization of those utilities. So it's expensive to design in that flexibility, but when you're a modality agnostic CDMO, you absolutely have to. If you're a biotech building for a single modality, then the infrastructure gets a lot simpler. For us, we wanted to provide that flexibility.
Okay, so you can really give them that insight and allow them to understand what that benefit is of going through all of those stages. Okay, really, really useful. So moving on slightly, we often have these brilliant founders who are amazing at science. So thinking about taking that move on for that founder, becoming now an entrepreneur, when should they really be engaging in manufacturing and CMC expertise to avoid later mistakes? When should they bring that capability on to show them the way, show them what they need to do next? Lucy, would you like to start us off?
On day one, of course, I would say that.
So when can they afford that expertise?
And I think it's very interesting for me to see as funds have got tighter, there's a lot less willingness to engage early. But what we have to understand is you're a really good founder and scientist, and you're amazing at that. And we, the world, wants you to do loads of that. Let us fix the problems that we're really good at. And so we have definitely seen and engaged the most and seen the most success for us and speed through to clinic and beyond, where CMC expertise is engaged earlier, as early as possible. Just even things just like choosing your raw materials and getting that right straight up so that you're not costing yourself 12 months in the future is really important.
Okay, so you heard it here first. Day one, everybody, day one. Bring that expertise in by hook or by crook. Okay, BJ, so how can early stage infrastructure really help founders think about their next milestones?
Early stage infrastructure in terms of the physical space, in terms of
physical space and capabilities. Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So I think if a company were to go into a well-built building, and by well-built I mean substantial mechanical systems, in a BSL-2 lab that can provide 16 air changes an hour and has plenty of backup power and has HEPA filtration and tissue culture spaces, things like that. I mean, I think the space becomes, the footprint is there, the infrastructure is there for the space itself to function for many different uses, and that can change, and grow over time as far as maybe the built-out nature of one specific lab versus another. But I think it happens at the base building, and it does not happen at the company level. It does not happen at the tenant level. It happens at the ownership level that puts in the infrastructure and designs it from day one. Otherwise, it becomes extremely costly and probably cost prohibitive to start to try to add capacities and functionality later. And so it's pick the right building, find the right partner that puts in enough infrastructure in order to make sure that whatever you can foresee the capacity needs to be, the building can support it day one. I mean, I literally just had a call an hour ago with a company that leased space, subleased space from a tenant that we leased space to. They came in and used the space completely different than what was designed for the tenant that we leased space to, and much more equipment, 5 extra biosafety cabinets, a couple extra hoods, and the air temps aren't holding. And then it becomes a question of like, make sure you underwrite the space and don't just assume as is will work for anything, because on the front end, if it's not engineered or at least not thought through, then it can cause you real problems and can stop processes, can stop experiments, can cause major issues. And so find the right building, find the right landlord that is putting in the right infrastructure systems. Once that's in there, I think you have plenty of flexibility.
Okay, so there's some gold there for you. So right infrastructure, do your diligence, and have the right person or people to help you do that diligence. Okay, so Becky has warned me we're running out of time, and apparently there are some drinks coming up very soon. So I want to ask, are there any questions? Anyone with any questions? Okay, if you are too shy to ask in front of everyone, my panelists will be available afterwards. So I'm going to close off with a question, and I'm going to ask you both the same question. So I said right at the beginning, the science in cell and gene therapy is increasing rapidly. It's sound. We've heard from previous FDA directors that particularly cell and gene therapy, the stuff works. We just need to get it approved. So the next real bottleneck is scale. How do we scale these therapies? How do we pay for them? And how do we get them out to patients? So those are some of the big problems. So what infrastructure decisions made today will most rapidly and efficiently affect how therapies reach patients? So quick answer. Lucy, I'm going to give you the first go as ladies first.
I mean, it's difficult to say from an infrastructure perspective, because for us, it always goes back to what the process is. And I think we've seen some really interesting things here this week about how we can fit more processes into a footprint, automate processes, take variability out of processes. And I think I would say, when you're designing your process, have that in mind, like what's this going to look like when you're trying to service a much bigger market. That infrastructure isn't there yet, and that infrastructure will look different. The spaces will be bigger, the automation will be higher, and I think that's the job of the CDMOs to provide that.
Okay, so think about what the future is going to hold, how you can be modular, efficient, effective, and grow with the times. BJ.
Venture capital. We need more capital from people like you to invest in this space. So free up the capital. I think public policy has a huge part of the bottleneck of both the specific targets actually being approved, and I think, at least in the U.S., that there appears to at least be some momentum around speeding up that process. I think the capital environments have to participate and have to come back and realize that, the risk return proposition is valuable enough, and that there is, on the risk spectrum, an investable business plan. So I would say it all starts with capital, and I think there's starting to be a little bit of, and frankly, if instead of it being 10 years and $10 billion to bring a drug to market, that's cut in half from a time and capital perspective, that will naturally happen. And I think there's some good things happening, but yeah, for sure it starts at a policy level.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, those damn venture capitalists. Right, so with that...
Write checks.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I hope it was useful for you. And now there's drinks, so we're going to start before you all. And on behalf of the entire organizing committee and this incredible panel, cheers. Long live cell and gene therapies.